Hello, Monday. It's snowing. Right. This is from Ron Grease at the Chart Store, and it's kind of an extended version of the Joker chart, which is rather magnificent. So if you understand the Joker chart, you'll easily understand this. The pulled in at the waist is the height of employment before a recession started, and all those up the top right are all the recessions since the Second World War. And the bottom right is kind of the Joker chart, and you can see that all the other recessions have ended with unemployment getting back above where it was before, earlier than 4 years. But this then shows us how then unemployment or employment then went on. It went on to gain much more employment after the recession had finished. It went on and pushed well above where it was at the beginning of the recession. But we can see the old laggard, the 2007 Great Recession, still going down there in the bottom. And for it to get up to where all the other old recessions have got to, maybe the Fed's right, it will be years and years before it gets up into that top right quadrant. Moving on to the Wall Street Journal. Banks face bind over cash pile. Davos. After receiving nearly €500 billion in cheap loans from the European Central Bank last month, the continent's banks face a dilemma to invest the money in lucrative but potentially risky government bonds or hoard the cash at a loss. I don't think I need to go into that too much. This is talking about the Eltros. The money's been borrowed at 1%, stash it back at the central bank as a deposit, and you get 0.25%. The choice reflects the uncertainty surrounding Europe's financial system at a time when dark clouds continue to hover over the Eurozone economy and its common currency. Regardless of whether banks use the money to buy bonds or simply stash it at the central bank for safekeeping, consumers and businesses are unlikely to see much of the funds pumped. So in Europe, basically the funds are pumped in a way that assets from the asset side of the balance sheet go to the central bank and are replaced by cash. In the United States, with quantitative easing, assets are taken off the balance sheet by the central bank, permanently bought and replaced with cash. So we're talking about the same thing. Excess reserves in the United States or deposits at the central bank ECB in Europe. The same thing. But this is the Wall Street Journal, and the implication obviously is that consumers and businesses are unlikely to see much of the funds pumped. And this is starting to really nag me now, because over the weekend I've read a couple of pretty highfalutin, what they call wonkish economists, real economists, talking about similar sorts of things, and all of them refer to these reserves or deposits at the central banks, whether they should or shouldn't be used to lend into the economy as consumer loans or business loans. And I think that we have established over the weeks and months that they never do. I've worked out maybe that they can do interbank lending with those reserves. But actually lending to the public, why on earth would they ever do so when they can magic money out of nowhere and put one bit on the asset side and one bit on the liability side? It would make no sense at all to lend this money. So why would these really top economists and newspapers like the Wall Street Journal that should know what they're talking about, why are they going on and on and on about it? Surely they must be right. I mean, I cannot believe that we are right, and all of them, with all the information that they've got, are just absolutely wrong. What is going on? Question mark. Let's go to a release from the ECB of its monetary developments in the euro area December 2011, and we still get M3 in the eurozone, and you can see it's gone down 2.6 to 1.6. Now these will be increases from annualized increases from the month before. M1's down a bit, 1.7, 2.1 down to 1.6. Loans to the private sector down 2.7, 1.71. And loans to the private sector adjusted for sales and securitization down 3, 1.9, 1.2. You see, I've again read and listened to the Financial Times and other wonkish blog-type economic people saying that it's very bad that the M1 and M3 are going down and the loans to the financial sector are going down in the eurozone. But I'm starting to wonder who to believe about what anymore. But I think we can generally believe that as long as loans aren't being pumped out, there is less money in the economy. Yeah? Yeah, surely. Right. A quick run on yesterday evening when I was kicking back and reading the Financial Times. All of these are January the 29th, which these journalists write for the Monday morning opening of the Financial Times. US and Canada. US rethinks offshore tax evasion reporting rules. This is where the I forgot who they are, the outreach people for getting taxes in for the American government from people outside the country. The US has responded to pressure from foreign governments and financial institutions over its crackdown on offshore tax evasion by proposing a significant change in how it will implement stringent reporting rules for overseas banks. It's quite an interesting article, a must-read if you're affected by this sort of thing. But I've just pulled out this one paragraph, which I'm going to make as a small theme over the next two presentation things. Banks have lobbied strenuously against the new rules, saying that searching through records for US citizens and then reporting them could cost billions of dollars. If they refused to comply, they would have to withdraw from the United States market or face 30% withholding tax on payments received from the US. Very stringent rules against banks overseas that don't comply with what the United States government want. And they are obviously kicking back against this. In the similar, January 29th, in the banks section, banks warn rule change will hurt recovery. This is a different, whole different thing. US banks fear that any recovery in the US housing market will be further delayed as a result of moves to remove credit ratings from American regulations, which will boost banks' capital requirements by billions of dollars. Again, if you're interested, that's a good read. But you can see it's a completely different thing to the reporting of foreign income. It's about housing and the credit rating agencies. And I've pulled one paragraph out of this. But banks are complaining that the proposal will hand a competitive advantage to overseas rivals. They say that besides toughening their capital requirements, the Fed's complex alternative system is less sensitive to deteriorating assets. Instead of credit ratings for sovereign debt, the new system incorporates ratings from the OECD, which currently places Greece in its least risky category, even though the market is pricing a substantial risk of default. Too much to go into exactly what's happening here, but you can either imagine or go and read the article, that they're trying to get away from S&P, Fitch and Moody's, but there is just no choice at the moment. There's no alternative. So, again, January 29th, and Brussels this time. Accountants at odds with Brussels. Accounting rulemakers are on a potential collision course with the European Commission over changes to the way companies report partially owned activities and off-balance sheet relationships. So all companies can have off-balance sheet vehicles, but obviously it's the financial sector that specialises in this sort of thing. And later I grabbed this from this article. The advisory group said some companies felt there was not enough time to meet the deadline, citing additional opposition from financial services groups, including insurers. Others backed the original timetable, including Barclays, the UK bank that's had its own brush with accounting controversy through its past use of complex semi-detached vehicle called Proteum. Oh, no need to go into that. It was complicated, but it's geared Barclays up to be ahead of the game, so they want the rules established now because they've already had to go through this, so that would give them an advantage. The group's request for a delay received a testy written response from Hans Hugervorst, IASB chairman, International Accounting Standards Board, something like that. He said he was troubled by the suggestion that some financial institutions were having difficulty preparing. If they really do not know what activities they control, it suggests that the reform should be implemented sooner rather than later, he said. But you can guarantee that the banks will motivate government friends to jump all over the accountants' overseeing bodies and get what they want done. It looks like the bank's lobbying power is enormous. So, moving on and finishing with opinion, January 29th again, but this isn't banks, this is shale gas. Fate trips up on politics and Bobble-nomics by John Dizzard. It's very tricky, this shale gas stuff. I'll read just the last 2 paragraphs from the article and then maybe say something else. The mercury and air toxics rule is about to be published, but the coal industry has friends in a prospective Romney administration and possible Republican Senate. They have plans to either stretch out the timetable on coal emissions abatement for another 4 or 5 years, or limit the controls to inexpensive but headline-friendly mercury filtration techniques. I'll try and explain this afterwards. So the gas industry hopes for regulations that would bring forward demand for their glut-bedeviled product are fading. Instead, the implosion of the shale promoters' capital budgets will lead to prices rising gradually to the marginal cost of supply. Now, obviously, I recommend reading the article to get really what's going on. But what I think I can give you as the rough and ready explanation is shale gas, stick a straw in the ground, find your gas and it whooshes out, as you can imagine. It's obviously not that simple, but you can imagine it's gas, so it whooshes out. Lots of it. And then you've got to go and get the rest. And that's a lot more difficult. In other words, you get an initial whoosh, and then afterwards the gas is there, but it's trickier to find. Across America, what they're doing is sticking the straw in the ground all over the place and getting lots of whooshes. So they've got a mass of supply, and they've been hoping like hope that the government would be, the Democrat government would be impressed by putting the screw on coal-fired power stations and knocking them basically out of the game. So it'd be best to get a coal-fired power station turned immediately over to gas, because it's cheap, there's plenty of it there, and it's so clean and wonderful. And that would take up this great oversupply that is happening because all the straws are going into the ground and gas is whooshing out. And then later, when there would be less supply coming on because they'd be struggling to get it out of the ground afterwards, they'd sort that out. But they've got the trouble now of having too much gas because it's all whooshing out, too much supply, price going down, and they're running out of money because the money isn't coming in because the price is so low. So they won't have the money to actually stay there long enough to get all the difficult to get out gas. They're just struggling where they are now with lots of gas and getting no money for it. So their hopes that the Obama administration would put in all sorts of green rules against dirty things and take this huge supply off the market is being dashed. And if the Republicans get in, there's a good chance that the dirty stuff can stay, and there will be a horrible oversupply of gas, which is no good for anybody. They're not going to turn the infrastructure over to permanently use it, because they're not, nobody can afford to, and there'll just be an oversupply of gas, and the makers of the gas that are sticking the straws in aren't getting nearly enough money to keep them there to get the hard to get out gas out. So it's just going to be a waste of gas, basically. Or something like that. Read the article. See you tomorrow. Bye.